Charles Reeves is here today, as you guys all know. I think everybody knows Charles, yeah?
Charles who?
Just about everyone. The people I know faces. I just need to get names.
All right. You guys want to just go around and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm good.
Real quick, okay. Mark Wilson. Isabella. I'm Jennifer Eager.
Pete Troiano.
Dami.
Michelle Montero.
Gerald. Siddiq Diman. Khalidi.
Bryce John. Peter Mooney.
And Danielle. Charles.
I'm Charles.
So Charles, I feel like we went back and forth a little bit with the content of the presentation today, but I think mostly MBA consulting in Africa and kind of your experience
Yes.
over
So
the decade that you spent there. Right?
yeah, my objective is I'm really concerned about speaking to what I know and not speaking about things that I don't know. I'm not African, so I don't want to it's very hard for me to put words into people's mouths or motives behind things I don't understand. So what I can really speak to is the experience of an MBA consultant in Africa, especially a Western one, an American one, which at least half of us in here might be. But even for you guys that are from the continent and may go back there, I think we're all going to bring back an MBA mindset no matter what. And so I think we experience a lot of the same things. And I was talking to Peter earlier, even if you go back, let's say you're from Ghana, or you go back to Africa and you're working in Nigeria or in Kenya, you're still a foreigner. And that still carries a lot of the same weight. You're still a guest in that culture. So I want to speak to things that I know about and a lot of the lessons learned that I've had over my career and through a lot of the TIM labs, since we've done, I think close to, let's say, 10 projects, so there are probably more than 10 projects, I think it's around 15 when I count them all up, some duplicate countries in Africa. And what I've tried to do in preparing for this is to pull out a lot of the common themes that we've seen from our projects and hopefully share those with you all in a way that we can learn from each other. So I've got some sort of introductory things I want to go over, but then also I don't want to be talking the whole time. It's going to be boring. I think I've got tons of content here, but I really don't plan to get to all of it. I think we should just follow things that are of interest to you all. We've worked with governments, NGOs, businesses, including SMEs to big corporations, multilateral groups, and sort of big project type organizations. There are many approaches and types of work and clients that you might encounter. So I think we should just ask questions about what you're interested in and we can explore. I've also got sort of on the side here a list of social enterprise and/or / impact investing, a lot of agribusiness that I've been involved with, agricultural development. So let's get into those more technical areas sort of as we desire, as we ask questions. A lot of the examples we use are pulled from those types of projects. I think I mentioned this. I'm really sensitive about overgeneralizing. Africa is a massive and incredibly varied place. It was on y'all's MTV site that you got this map of Africa overlaid with the other countries that it relates to in terms of size, and it's landmass of the U.S., China,
I think it was Western Europe, US, China, and the US.
Japan, so all these countries combined, right? And there's so many, there can be cultural variations in countries, even within organizations. Not to mention, we haven't really worked in North Africa. I've never been up there. Another example, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about, agribusiness, project work, NGO work, and we've done some work with ExxonMobil, so at the highest level, or with governments, and say the Rockefeller Foundation. But I haven't worked, for example, in the Nigerian banking industry, which I understand is one of the most dynamic sectors on the continent. So I can't speak to everything. So I'm trying to sort of set my limitations here too. All right, so let me jump in and then.
Can I just pause? Is anybody going on a TIM lab or been on a TIM lab? Planning to maybe apply for a TIM lab? Just a couple people?
He's going to Tunisia
Oh, cool.
this summer.
Tunisia?
Yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah, I mean, I feel like about half of us. Are you still planning on being through?
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what we're waiting for that though.
I
It's
think our
coming
group
together.
to get together. Yeah.
It's coming together on both sides.
Yeah.
We can talk about that later, but yeah.
Yeah.
We may have Penley actually sign a memorandum with their governor when he's in Peru, so that's like, I'll just mention that. It's not related to Africa, but it'd be a nice tour.
Right.
He's gonna be down there.
Nice.
So it'll add some pretty high visibility to that project.
Yeah, I think so. Anik was one of the people that was interested in chat.
Oh yeah, I can touch on that, sure. I mean, just Tim Lab Africa, you know, since it's related, we are looking at Chad for the fall, and we are looking at one or more technology entrepreneurs working in either Ghana or Uganda. I think it's gonna be really exciting. So that's another thing. The point of this is like, you know, if I'm talking about agribusiness and rural agriculture development, there's also this, I mean, you know, Africa in a lot of ways is so dynamic, and the technology sector is really taking off in ways that sometimes you know, surpass and leapfrog what we're doing here in the U.S. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
cell phones and internet access is one of the best examples. You can step out of the airport and you're wired, you know, in let's say Nairobi or just about anywhere, or right on the street corner. And you know, in the U.S., what do you got to do? Go to the AT&T store, sign away your life, wait hours, and then you're stuck
Credit
for
check.
years.
Yeah, it's not fair. Anyway, yeah, I think so. Temlab, potentially Temlab. No, yes, maybe, yeah. Okay, me too. You're not going to. Okay. So yeah, I think about half of us, which is kind of cool. So
Yeah.
be good.
Yeah, we've had
Charles, what time labs have you guys done specifically in Africa? What subjects and what areas?
Good question. Let me try and run down. We've got a lot of sort of embedded as examples. We've done, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff. We've done a couple in Ghana. One was with the ExxonMobil Foundation, and one of their grantees who was working on moringa. You might know moringa, the miracle tree.
Yeah.
So moringa is called the miracle tree. That every part of the plant is beneficial in multiple ways to multiple stakeholders. And I say multiple stakeholders, like the leaves you can make a powder for children that's really nutritious, and you can also press the seeds to get oil and make biodiesel out of it, which is what this project was focusing on. They were focused on the nutritional benefits, but they wanted to go at a social enterprise model with the biodiesel. And that was being sponsored by ExxonMobil through a grant competition they had. We also worked with ASU's engineering outfit in Ghana, where they had invented a gel ethanol fuel and clean cook stoves to go along with it. They were trying to understand how to go to market with in a sustainable way. We worked with the government of Liberia, sourcing social enterprises and impact investing deals for potential impact investors based in the West and other places. We worked in Angola with ExxonMobil. We worked with the affiliate there directly in Luanda, and we helped them out with their agricultural and really rural development programs around the country. So they had a pretty massive landscape of things they were trying to do, and we helped them try to understand those better and make them more efficient. You know, each one of these, of course, has got just multiple stories and really good experiences and some really traumatic experiences as well. Mostly good. And a lot of lessons learned, which is what we'll get to. In Kenya, we've done a couple. We worked with Caroline's family's company, the Kapcheta Tea Factory. We just did another project with them with the MBAs, focusing specifically on international marketing for them. That went really well. We also worked with Grain Handler, the second largest grain handler in the country, based in, before you get to the tea factory, Nakuru, the main road coming out of Nairobi. Helped them streamline operations and institute a warehouse receipt system for their outgrower farmers, which is another sort of like one of those technical concepts we could sort of put on the side and dig into. Warehouse receipt systems are really important for agriculture growth on the continent. We worked in Rwanda. One of our very first projects when we first started this program in early 2010 was in Rwanda with a computer reseller. They took refurbished computers and resold them in Rwanda and surrounding countries, a lot of government contracts to the schools and things like that. They were looking at taking that refurbishment process and bringing it into their own value chains. So they were buying it refurbished from someone. They were thinking about doing it themselves, and so we did a value chain analysis of that to see if it would work in Rwanda. And that was, again, because it was one of the first ones. We had a great team, but I recall we were just, as an org, Finney and I are still just a team. It's a two-person outfit. So everything that we do is just us, and at that point, we're completely flying by the seat of our pants. We were lucky we had really good students who were like, okay, go do this. They did amazing. Uganda, we've done a couple good experiences in Uganda, both with social enterprise models, working with solar power and solar lamps. Now it's our first with Solar Sister, which I'll reference again in Tanzania because we went back with Solar Sister, who was in, this is an ExxonMobil grantee again. So this is part of our partnership with the ExxonMobil Women's Economic Opportunities Initiative, who's been an institutional partner since we started. In Tanzania, we were so successful in Uganda helping them understand how to scale from, let's say, a 25 entrepreneur organization, and Entrepreneurs for Solar Sister were the women who sold the solar lamps and made up sort of a network of distributors that ultimately was going to contribute to a sustainable, at least country level structure that could, feed itself and feed the management. We were really successful formalizing some of their community entry and human resource procedures, helping them scale to what is now a 400-person organization in Uganda. We went into Tanzania to help them enter that market as well, because they were getting started up in Tanzania. And we're preparing projects in Tunisia, Chad, and I don't know about Nigeria, but we've always got some lines in Nigeria. There's so much going on there. We sort of fished around in there for years and continue to do so, trying to find the right way to get involved because it is such a dynamic economy. Personally, before that I did my Peace Corps in Benin in West Africa. That was before Thunderbird, and traveled around the region, rode a camel in the Sahara Desert, all those things, which is really some of the just phenomenal personal experiences. And then after Thunderbird, and people ask me, oh, what was your TIM lab? I didn't have a TIM lab. We didn't have a TIM lab when I was here. But I went overseas as part of one of Finney's very first consulting courses that he does here on campus. He had a client, this is Millennium Villages project, which is Jeff Sachs' poverty sort of proof of concept project that he's implementing all over Africa. We were working with the business development director who wanted a marketing plan for honey that was coming out of the Ethiopian village project. The business director out of New York wanted someone on the ground. He really needed someone to fill a role there. And I had African experience. I had a good relationship with Finney. He said, oh, Charles is your guy. And so I actually dropped the class, took an independent study, and went to Ethiopia and worked. And then liaised with the team that was working here on campus. And then I continued to work for Millennium Villages after graduation. So that was really my first MBA experience anyway on the continent. And it was a really rich experience. For a lot of reasons, and we'll get into that maybe some with some of these sort of stories, maybe. But if I get too deep into it, we need therapy, because it's the single most dysfunctional organization I've ever worked with, for a lot of different reasons. Does that sort of help a bit of my experience and then the Tim Lab experience? All right. So let me set us up here. I kind of have a philosophical construct I want to go into about doing business in Africa, especially with an MBA mindset. And it's something that Finney and I talk to our teams about a lot in the field. My theme here is don't try to impose rationality on an irrational system. Y'all heard that from us before, anybody? You will. It's not the system, it's you. There are no rational systems. Okay, not in Africa, not anywhere. This is, like I said, I'm going to get a little philosophical here. The myth of the rational man is the fundamental flaw in traditional economics, right? That's why it's such a flawed discipline. A rational man makes decisions based on this sort of perfect calculation of what's in my best self-interest. The French writer is Nobel Prize winner, philosopher Albert Camus, right? You guys may know him, right? He advanced what has really become an existential concept that life is absurd by nature. It's full of paradoxes that is thinking creatures as humans. We can't necessarily unwind or rationalize to exist in these paradoxes side by side. Yet our brains want to demand that the world behave rationally, that things are fair, that things have causality. But our demand that the world be rational is really absurd. Humans are rational creatures, yes. We're also emotional creatures, and we're social creatures. And all those add up to our behavior. You can't unwind them. They're combined. And organizations made up of those people are all more complex. And nature doesn't even have the capacity to feel towards us, right? So there is no fairness or rational system out there. And that causes us a great deal of anxiety, I think, in our daily life, of trying to rail against this system, which is just not rational. And just don't torture yourself. Just don't do it. Just let it go. And especially, believe me, in Africa, okay, when you're crossing cultures, countries, economies, languages, it's going to be more extreme. And Africa, in my experience, and especially in my Peace Corps, which is the longest, deepest experience, which is 2+ years in West Africa, is the furthest you can get away from an American cultural sort of viewpoint, I believe. And anyone can challenge me on that, but it's more semantic than anything. Africa is very high context, it's very group, it's sort of social oriented, it's not individualistic like the US is. You know the phrase Ubuntu from I think South Africa, right? Kind of breaks down a lot of ways. Society gives humans their humanity. You exist because I exist. And unlike, I think, other high harmony, high context Asian cultures, very group-centric, I think that Africa is very high context, but also it's very in your face. Asian cultures are a little more, subtle, and reserved, and especially in, let's say, West Africa, it's probably one of the most, I call it like aggressively friendly, and it's really wonderful, but it can be, it's very much in your face for someone who has this individualistic American mindset. Kenya is a place I think is a little softer, a little more reserved, but still much more, I think, aggressive than, let's say, an Asian context. So you are going to be, if you try to come in with a specific mindset, you're going to be, I think, frustrated. So some of this is just like, let it go. And what I'm trying to do here, well, let me stop right now. Am I going too far? Am I characterizing cultures? Is that inappropriate for me to say?
I like it, it's good.
Am I, okay, is that fair?
Well, it's your experience.
Yeah, and I hope I speak to, I'm trying to speak to what I know, and also be careful if there's something I don't know, then just forgive me. So with that is kind of a philosophical underpinning, right, to this whole thing. That phrase, imposing rationality on an irrational system, it's a phrase I really borrowed from Professor Finney in the first place. I'm kind of taking it to another level and a larger scale, but it's something that we usually end up reminding our teams of when they're encountering client behavior in the field, where the client's doing things that are clearly not in their self-interest. It's like, what are you doing? Like, we're trying to show you, how you become sort of a self-sustaining organization, or what you say your stated goals are, and they just refuse to sort of comply. I'm taking that further and using that existential philosophy to help us really, in this room, our MBA mindset, to sort of break that down completely. Break down our mindset, our understanding of the world. And when I talk about the MBA sort of rationality, I'm talking about specifically regards to business and organizations, right? We think they need to be efficient, profit-making, or outcome-oriented, right? And it's not necessarily correct in all situations. Or at least it should be deeply analyzed when we're facing organizational cultures that don't seem to comply with our expectations. Now, I'm not saying that our MBA mindset is wrong, because what we as MBAs or master's students bring to the table is really critical. Okay, I've never had a Tim Line project where we didn't think that we were able to add value, or that the client could improve in some ways. Well, our global business skills, management, strategic acumen are just sorely needed around the world. But we have to be aware that a lot of the organizations we may deal with, they're not going to act in rational ways, or ways that we think are rational. So our techniques have to be modified. We have to look underneath the surface, understand what's going on, understand the true values and motivations of the group that we're dealing with. we have to understand the other context may be very, very different. So I have a set of sort of examples. I've broken things down into broad buckets. Communication, both sort of personally and within organizations. Information, the availability, we'll talk about the availability of data, and that it's not.
Not traditionally how we're
right.
expected to be here.
Not at the IBIC. Now we're going to find what you need there, depending on the project, right? And organizational purpose, where we can talk about, I think this is some cool points there. I think a lot about social enterprise there. And so those are my sort of buckets, and a lot of these, like I said, pull it out. Hopefully, there's about 3 or 4 here themes that we really see across all these STEM Lab projects in my own experience. And again, I got to be careful to not talk the whole time and sort of handle questions as they come up. So I guess, just kind of raise your hand or interrupt if there's something you want
We
to.
generally use interrupt.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
A little bit more casual
Perfect.
than us right
This is a flat communication structure.
now.
Go
Yeah,
ahead and interrupt.
exactly. Lightly, of course.
Okay, great. So my first thing then, so a lot of these examples then are examples of behaviors and organizations that we may not see as rational. I'm not trying to be critical. It's not really my intent. I'm trying to cast a light on some of these things to help us understand them a little better, and hopefully so that those of us here can learn from the experiences of others, right? Which is why we're all here.
Charles, give a specific example of that, of how sort of they self-sabotage.
I've got lots of examples. You want me to just get to them as I sort
however
of get
you
there?
want to do it,
I'll yeah, I mean, well here I can jump to one right now. This is one of my main themes. So going on your question then, the sort of hierarchical culture, and what I'm thinking of as like almost a patriarch organization. Patriarch's a pretty specific term, but in Africa I think it's pretty relevant, because it usually is a man who tends to take care of his company and his people. And this is sort of an organizational structure and communication issue. So that's sort of my bucket here for this. This is when power is concentrated at the top of the organization. And it's a common problem. It's not just an African problem by any means. It's a classic sort of entrepreneur, small business mindset versus going to scale. And when you do that, you're an entrepreneur, a small business can operate in a certain way. And that one person can make all the decisions. But as you scale in any organization, any culture, you have to formalize the organization more. Create formalized decision-making structures, reporting structures, and you have to push power down into the organization. You have to push decision-making power into the organization. If you don't, the owner, the founder, the boss tends to micromanage everything and doesn't communicate within the organization. Decision-making, when it's centralized, the organization ends up just grinding to a halt because it can't function. Because one man can't do all of these things. And so to jump to a specific example, this was when we were working with the Palms group I mentioned in Ghana, who was working on the Moringa biofuel. And this was a really wonderful organization. They were a Christian missionary organization that had a lot of success doing all sorts of different programs. They tended to chase grants a little bit. They were very mission-driven, did a lot of health work, got a lot of contracts from the government. They were really effective. It was a really good group, a lot of competent people in this group. And Pastor Joseph was the head of this group, really wonderful man. And he came to New York and met us as part of the Clinton Global Initiative. He was invited as part of the ExxonMobil group, and they gave him a grant to work on this biofuel Moringa business that was going to be a hybrid. So you have this group that does a lot of social activities, but they were going to start up this hybrid business where they were actually make revenues, profits, right? Because it's a hybrid, they feed back into the operation, but revenues from a Moringa business. The thing with Pastor Joseph was that he really was like the patriarch of this organization, and he did, not intentional, but he did not communicate strategy or mission within the organization, and he did not push decision making down within the organization, and he really controlled data at the top. So we would be working with our people in the field who are really competent, really good, let's say, crop technicians. And as part of the lab project, you have to collect information. And so you're asking your client all these things. And they would constantly get deferred as, oh, pastor knows that, he has that information, you're gonna have to ask him. Okay, fine, let's go to the pastor and ask him. It's not forthcoming, it's not happening, it's not coming. He's only one man, right? He's managing this entire organization, and every decision ends up being dependent on him. So no one in the field is empowered to make these decisions. He also ends up sort of hoarding that data and twisting it to meet his own sort of self-justification. This was, oh boy, a lot of concepts here. This is also, like I said, a mission-driven organization, which means they're not necessarily looking at the business fundamentals of something. They had decided to go forward with this Moringa biodiesel initiative. They were going forward with it. Okay? What our team ultimately found out was there was no market for biodiesel in Ghana. The information, the data that we got from Joseph was that there was. When we bring all my teams together here, this is data and lack of data. You have to go out and triangulate and double check that data to find it. Who knows what triangulation is? Yeah, right. Would you say that again?
You have to come in the same piece from different angles to make sure it cross-checks.
Exactly. Triangulation, asking the same question of at least three or more different people, and sometimes asking the question in different ways, right? To see, how accurate is the answer you're getting. This was, we're looking for information on the biodiesel market. There is no, Bloomberg terminal to plug into to figure that out. I don't even know if that's what the Bloomberg terminal is. We don't have that information. I've never used it. You can't just look that up. So first we had Joseph's data. Okay, that's one thing. If we built our project around that, we might come to the conclusion that sure, you can do this because it's based on your own data. But the team was hearing enough other things, even from someone else within the organization, that said otherwise about market data. So they went out in the market and triangulated that data. They came back to him and presented this to him in the presence actually of his deputy, who was a guy named Ross Benji, which is, Ross is it's Amharic, it's a prince, but he was Rastafarian. Really wonderful man, one of the happiest, most cheerful guys I've ever met. Really devoted his life to different social causes. Incredibly competent guy. Probably could run the organization, by himself. Knew his stuff. He knew the data, and he had given the team data that was different than what Pastor Joseph had. And what they did in this meeting, they told us this story. It was so profound. They were going over this market data with Pastor Joseph, and Benji was there. And Joseph, they knew they had the information they had from Joseph. They showed him the data. They also had data from Benji, which was different. And they said, based on this information, this is not feasible. And Pastor Joseph said, well, no, I don't think that's right. Let me check that. This is my data that shows otherwise. And the team sort of goes back to Benji, like, really? And he does, and I wasn't there, but it was this very sort of knowing shrug. He's like, the pastor is right. And he knew what was going on. Yeah.
Yeah, but did you do a background check on him? There are a lot of charlatans, people who pretend to be, something else around. Yeah.
Background check on
who he was, exactly what
on Joseph.
on Joseph.
I mean, we didn't have the opportunity to do a background check on him. This organization, by all accounts, I mean, they were getting a several $100,000 ExxonMobil grant. I will say, you have a point in that some people, especially
There are a lot of stories around about people who come, especially to the West, with some NGO or some organization, saying they are getting funds to go and do something in Africa, which never gets done. So
it's a good point.
Yeah.
And Pastor Joseph was Ghanaian. He wasn't an outsider. I think you've got sort of two realities within this example,
yeah.
and they're both right. I feel like in the time I spent with this organization, understanding its history, they were legitimate and they did a lot of really good work, especially in the healthcare sector. And I can tell that from their sort of country operations. I went around the country with them. But it's also true that a lot of times organizations like that, and I have this with my some of my other like foreign NGO notes. Sometimes the core competency of an organization, I don't think this is the case with here, but it was partially the case. Sometimes the core competency is not like the field work that they put in all these grant proposals. Their core competency is writing grants, and getting the grants funded, right, and paying the bills. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so taking a kick off from what people said, right? And I worked in a bank in Nigeria for a while. And so before you give a loan to an individual or a company, there's something called the 5 C's of credit, which is universal, right? And most finance people will tell you that out of the 5 C's, we have 2 C's, which is cash flow and character, right? Most finance people will tell you that cash flow is probably the most important C, because if it doesn't make money, you can't pay back your interest and capital. But honestly, in Nigeria, the most important C was character, because there's so much cash flow in many businesses. But what do you do if the proprietor pays dividend to himself and he erodes the cash flow, and so he comes and files for bankruptcy because he doesn't have money to pay me? You know, so I think very important was probably the character of this man, because I promise you, when I hear that the only thing bigger than lies is statistics or something, it's so easy.
Yeah. Is it lies, damn lies, and statistics?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Like damn lies, damn lies. It's so easy to manipulate here. It just depends on what angle you're coming from.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, right, it boils down to who you're doing business with. For example, like in the Grameen Bank, when that was started, right, they gave the loans to groups of people, and usually groups of women. Why did they do that? Because they knew that if I take the loan to like 4 of us, right, it's our net on the line. I would make sure that the people I'm bringing are trustworthy people, because if you default, then I default, and so so it's all about trust. And I think that's like the major thing that when you're doing business in Africa is number one thing, character.
Absolutely. And I think in this specific case, I think we were somewhere in between. I don't think Joseph was a bad guy. He wasn't going to abscond with the money. But what we did find out was when we really disproved this business plan, and he really we got the impression like he's just going to do this anyway.
Yeah.
And like I said, he wasn't going to abscond with the money, but he was probably going to end up wasting a lot of donor money on activities that weren't ultimately going to pay out. And he wasn't just going to flat out steal it, but this was really, we felt like, going to be inefficient use of funds, whereas he could still get in front of people and convince them of his case. He was good at that. But
Did he get a grant for that specific thing, and under the terms of the grant, he had to do it, even though it wasn't
Well,
necessarily
yeah.
something that was the top?
Well, yeah.
Okay,
and that's a huge
so
issue.
you have
We're-
to check that with the GEOs.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
We're experiencing that now with a client in DC. Our first domestic Tim Lab project. You all probably know some of the women on that project. They're trying to understand how do they grow and scale efficiently around the world, because they're getting a lot of demand to go around the world. They're following grants. They're following Exxon in a lot of cases, who wants them to come, work in the countries where Exxon is, and they give them grants. And then this organization is really hard pressed to say no to a grant, because you want that 20% overhead. You want to pay the bills, even though they may be able to do a calculation on a specific country and say, you know what, this grant that you're giving us to go in this country is not enough. We're going to end up losing money. We're going to get stuck in this country for years. We don't have an exit plan, and it's not a good country for what we're trying to do. But right now, they're really resisting that feedback. And I told them the same thing. It's like, geez, I think their core competency is getting grants. And as long as they can keep doing it and keep the money coming in the front door, they're not going to change behavior.
It's an addiction.
Mhm.
Addicted to grants.
And it's understandable. These aren't bad people. But you got to look at the way an organization is incentivized, and when you're thinking about where's my next paycheck coming from, that's what you're going to do.
One thing I want to ask you, those grants and pastures in one man soul, other things you went and some other people are going to other masters of Christ. But one piece to me looks like missing here, the relationship, the trust. I think you pointed out the trust. But how to build a trust? I think in Middle East also the same problem. Like say you go, okay, they know you went there to help them out, but like how do you connect with these people? Like I know he wants to do in his own way. He thinks my way is the best way, and which is not correct, right? When you do the assessment. But the thing is, even if you say something, if he doesn't listen, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So this gap in this context, how you establish that kind of relationship? So when you are saying something and it's meaningful, if this guy doesn't understand, it's more, to me it looks like that he wants to do it his own way, but I think it's a lack of knowledge, lack of awareness. So how to fill that gap basically, that becomes a challenge.
Absolutely. And you sort of lead me into the part I want to talk about relationships.
Yeah.
Because that is probably above and beyond every project that we do in Africa, but everywhere else too. It all comes down to, it's building that relationship, especially in a very short amount of time, and establishing that trust in this specific situation. In a lot of these, especially when you have sort of, and this is true in a lot of countries, not just the continent of Africa, but when you have like a sort of a hierarchical leader, right? What's the worst thing you can do, especially in a faith-saving culture? Yeah, it's like calling them out in a meeting like this. It's like, you're doing this wrong, you need to do it this way. You're done. Your project is over. You might as well just go home because you're going to be completely shut out. We've had that happen before, where we really maybe insulted the person. We maybe tell them the truth, but in front of his entire staff. Like, so what you can do is try to build that rapport with the individual at a very personal level and show him these things in a way that he can take ownership.